If two players have exactly the same amount of points when a Fortnite tournament ends, who wins? Well, there's currently 5 tie-breaking criteria to calculate who ends up being the winner, but these rules weren't always as airtight, meaning that a $1.5 million tournament ended up being decided by a coin flip.
We've got a decision.
PAX West 2018 was hosted the final week of the Summer Skirmish, a 4-day, $1.5 million Fortnite LAN event. Days 1 to 3 were qualifiers, where the top 33 players from each day would make it through to the finals, which was held on day number 4. Now, modern tournaments have point systems, which are by design difficult to tie on. There are so many different points gained for the majority of placement thresholds, and there's points for every single elimination. However, with 50 teams in the lobby, ties still happen very frequently. In Chapter 5 Season 1's FNCS Grand Finals, there were 4 different teams tying at different parts of the leaderboard. In fact, the difference between placing 20th and 21st place is $2,000, so tiebreakers regularly impact tournaments. Now, with this in mind, by looking at the Summer Skirmish point format, it's easy to see that a huge percentage of teams would be tying on points alone. Placement points were only given to players when they reached a top 10, which meant that 90% of the players in every single match wouldn't gain a single placement point. Now, the elimination points were equally as punishing, as you'd only get your first elimination point after getting 3 eliminations. So imagine it's a high pressure LAN tournament, maybe the biggest of your career. You play some of the best Fortnite you ever have, but unfortunately go down in 11th place while still managing to get 2 eliminations. Now, I think that's a pretty good game. It's not the best, sure, but it's pretty respectable. But with the Summer Skirmish point format, this would net you 0 points. So this meant that after the first game on day 3, which was the last qualifier to get into the finals, only 17 of the 100 players gained any points at all, with 13 of those players all tying on 1 point. Now, one of these players was SSG Colton, who we'll absolutely come back to later. Now, after the 4 games on the day were complete, the top 33 players to qualify to the finals had been decided. Well, actually, only the top 28 players had been decided, as over 30 people had a single point, meaning that they were all tied, and now the tiebreaker rules would kick into effect to decide who would qualify. So if the points are tied, the first tiebreaker is Victory Royales. Now, in Chapter 2, Season 4, the winners of the Middle East region's FNCS was actually decided by this tiebreaker. Wagner, I4, and Dexophyte, and Cookie, Mev, and Nile both ended on 202 points. However, Wagner's trio had 2 wins, whereas Cookie's team had none, and therefore they lost the tiebreaker, and Wagner, I4, and Dexophyte were crowned the champions. This was also a massive difference at the Solo World Cup in 2019, as Creo won a game in the finals, whereas King did not, resulting in him placing 1 spot higher in the leaderboards and earning him an additional $150,000. However, given the players on day 3 of the Summer Skirmish all had 1 point, they were not playing very well and were not winning any games, so they were all tied on this metric as well. 0. So if the players are tied on Victory Royales, the next factor is average eliminations. The higher, the better, obviously. Now, given the Summer Skirmish Day 3 was a 4-game tournament and the qualification threshold to qualify to the finals was top 33, this meant that the players who were tying here weren't exactly fragging out every game. At the top of the 1-point gang was Flower, who fell victim to this pretty poor point system. Despite getting 7 eliminations total across the 4 games, he was only able to gain a single point. Now, at least this came in handy as it allowed him to win the tiebreaker and qualify to finals. But taking a deeper look into this leaderboard, you can again see that 7 players all had 1 point, 0 Victory Royales, and 5 eliminations. Again, meaning there are 7 players tied for the qualification to the finals. Now, in the very unlikely event that players tie on points, Victory Royales, and average eliminations, then the next thing is average placement to decide who would go higher on the leaderboards. Now, given there are 100 placements in a solo match, the likelihood of 2 or more players tying on this metric exactly split across 4 games is so incredibly unlikely. I actually asked ChatGPT what the likelihood of 2 players having the exact same average placement across 4 games, just picking like 4 random numbers, what's the likelihood that they would average to be the same? And it basically told me this is impossible to calculate. And I want to just stress this, I am not smart enough to do this calculation myself. So it's very, very Very unlikely, and maybe someone smarter than me will be able to tell me exactly how unlikely this is. But as you may have predicted, this of course does not mean that it's impossible. In game 1, Cryo gets pumped and dies in 18th place, and Colton grabs 3 eliminations and then dies in 14th, gaining his single point. In game 2, Colton goes down in 47th, but Cryo frags out and gets 3 eliminations before dying in 15th, also gaining his single point. In game 3, both players die before the top 50, and then in the final game, both players were unable to make it into the top 20. At the end of the day, Colton and Cryome tied on the exact same points, victory royales, average eliminations, and the most statistically unlikely stat of average placement per match, as they both finished on exactly 35.5 average placement. What makes this even more unlucky and insane is that this happened right at the qualification threshold, with both players being tied in 33rd place. So how do they calculate who's making it to the finals? Now, some players suggested a 1v1 at the Lazy Links golf course, others a playground 1v1, or just maybe measuring how much damage they've dealt, which is something that could be done now, no problem. On the broadcast, Courage suggested a dance-off, which, given competitive Fortnite's track record at the time, I think would actually have been quite fitting, but the most obvious answer here would be to just qualify them both. This was the final day of qualifiers, and with the top 33 players from each qualifier making it to the finals, this actually meant that the finals was to be played with 99 players instead of a full lobby of 100. The prize pool was split so that every single player who played the finals made at least $5,000, even if you came dead last, and first place would earn $225,000. So with a 99 player lobby and with prizing for every single threshold, it would only be logical to allow both players into the finals to fill up the lobby. So they did a coin flip instead. Now, this was stated ahead of time on the broadcast, in the rules, and strictly to the players that in the event of a tiebreaker, these were the rules. And actually, once the coin flip was over, an Epic employee commented that advancing the tied player after the coin flip would be unfair to all of the other 34th place players through the week and against our own rulebook, referring to the other 2 players who placed 34th in Qualifier 1 and Qualifier 2. To me, this seems like a bit of an odd hill to die on, given the other 2 34th place teams didn't tie on every imaginable tiebreaker, and this truly was a statistical anomaly, but they stuck to their word and flipped the coin.
Ladies and gentlemen, in the event of ties, we go to coin flip. Now, here we go. I'm going to flip the coin. Here we go. Tails. We've got a decision.
Moving forward.
Cryobe.
Losing the tiebreaker meant that Colton missed out on $5,000 minimum, and following this, he made a much more respectful tweet than I would have given the circumstances. He continued to play through the fall skirmish and even played with Cypher PK, and then, in his own words, he quit that trash game in 2019. Don't blame me, buddy. But you may be wondering, how did Cryome do in the finals after winning the tiebreaker? Awful. He placed 90th, bagged his $5,000 prize, continued to compete into the middle of 2020, and then after earning $250 in the Solo World Cup qualifiers, also quit. Now, in the extremely unlikely event that this ever happens again, Epic Games has since changed this rule. If players tie on series points in the FNCS, which is what qualifies them to the semi-finals, the final tiebreaker is actually decided by whoever has the highest rank. Yes, you heard that correctly. Whoever has been playing ranked the most is the final tiebreaker if it ever comes down to it. As for individual tournament placements, coin flip has yes been removed, and in its place is total seconds survived across all matches. Now, if 2 players manage to tie on points, victory royales, average eliminations, average placement, and tie on total time survived, you know what? They should probably just flip a coin.